Wel, noswaithau iawn I chi, croeso I sesiwn byw yma yng nghwmni fi, Adam Price a Delith Jewel, Plaid Cymru yn fyw. Very warm welcome to you to this Plaid Cymru live session with myself, Rhun ap Iorwerth, Adam Price, who you might have heard of, and Delith Jewel also. Good to have you both with us this evening, Adam and Delith. Bilingual session. If you've got a question, send it in, Welsh or English. We'll make sure that everybody can follow. Gofynnwch eich cwestiwn yn Gymraeg, na ni ateb yn Gymraeg, a sicrhau bod pawb yn gallu deall hynny hefyd. We'll make it all very informal, but I know you'll have a lot of questions to ask us and lots on your mind this evening, because this is a tough Friday evening. It's 6:01, and at 6 o'clock, a minute ago, we began on 17 days of lockdown. We can call this a lockdown again. It's a firebreak. It's a firebreak that we, Adam, called for, not because we want any restrictions in place, but because we were pretty convinced that this was needed now.
And you, Rhun, came up with a name, didn't you? Which actually, it's not a superficial point, because, you know, I mean, well, you can explain the difference between a circuit breaker and the idea of a fire break.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not claiming to have come up with the name, but certainly when they were still talking about circuit breaker being the name for what was needed, I thought, you know, fire break works better, because circuit breaker to me suggests you're putting a little circuit break in place now and then you're ready to go round and round again. Actually, we want a fire break that is a wall, that is a fresh start, that hopefully can set us up for not having to have an inevitable, you know, other lockdown in months to come. I think it is important, and I'm pleased that the firebreak is the term being used.
Yeah, no, indeed, because I think that's the crucial point, isn't it? I mean, the similar discussion going on in Ireland at the moment as well, and that the last thing we want is a strategy which has at its core the idea of successive waves of lockdown, because a lockdown should be a last resort option. It's an emergency call. When you're in an emergency, you have to pull it, but you don't want to be in that situation. And one of the key questions, you know, now is, how do we avoid being in this position again?
Yeah, we'll talk about some of our ideas in the next hour or so, hopefully prompted by some of your questions as well. Delith, you're Shadow Minister for Transforming Public Services and the Future. You're a member for the southeast of Wales. How do you think the people are feeling in the southeast?
Well, the southeast, most parts of the southeast, up until 6 o'clock this evening, we're already facing restrictions. I mean, and not Monmouth, but most parts were already under local restrictions because of how high the trajectory of the virus, or how high the trajectory of the virus is going, I suppose, at the moment. So I think that most people in the southeast are, well, I don't think anyone's going to be delighted that we are where we are they? And I mean, from what Adam was saying there, we have called for this firebreak to happen. But I think that the fact that it's had to happen is because it's an admission of partial failure by the government, that we shouldn't have had to have been in this situation in the first place. And I think that a lot of people living in the southeast, as people across Wales, will be feeling that, you know, we're having this intervention now, that people are being asked to make a lot of sacrifices, a lot of changes to their lives. This has to be for something. This has to achieve something, and this has to actually mean that we don't have to have this continuous cycle of lockdowns that we've been referring to.
And you know, just to put it in context, how we feel about going into this period of restriction. My sort of guiding principles as Plaid's Shadow Minister for Health and Care is that there should be as few, you know, restrictions as possible, but enforced strictly. You know, that's the position I want us to be in. I think we will have all sorts of restrictions for months to come, unfortunately, but that principle that they should be as few as possible and enforced properly. And even in, you know, we've been very, very supportive of taking the cautionary approach, but by Welsh Government. But even in the build-up to the summer and the relaxing of restrictions, I was challenging government, relax as much as you can, test the evidence to see if there are things that we can do that we're unable to. But the crucial thing now, Adam, was that we had reached a point where it was clear to us that we were heading back to another April, and that means you've got to make it nationwide and you've got to make it strict.
Yeah, you're right, Rhun. I mean, you and I met with the scientists that are advising the Welsh Government, the technical advisory cell, and they published a report, then setting out the evidence. And I have to say, in this job, you read a lot of reports, but I've very seldom seen one as clear cut and unequivocal in its advice as that one. And it was similar in the meeting I had with the chief medical officer. People would die if this step hadn't been taken. And under those circumstances, the government, I think, had no option but following the advice. And, if anything, Rhun, we were arguing, look, go, Jacinda Ardern says in New Zealand, go early, go hard. Yeah. If you're going to do it, if you're at that stage where you've got exponential rise in infection, things are getting out of control, you're better off going earlier, because then the length of the restrictions are going to be not as long. So, yeah, there was no way with that level of predicted death. I mean, these are more than statistics. These are people, aren't they? I mean, over 1,000, grandparents, parents, wives, and husbands that according to the scientists would have died if this action hadn't been taken. So it was absolutely the right thing to do.
One question I'm being asked a lot, and Delith, maybe you are as well, is what can 2 weeks do? People are worried that 2 weeks isn't enough, and actually the case numbers will continue to rise after the end of the 2 weeks, which is quite complicated. But what we have been told is that, listen, this can make a real difference to the stress that's put on the NHS in coming weeks and on the numbers of deaths that we can expect. And at the end of the day, that's what my constituents are telling me they want. And same with you, Delith?
Absolutely. And I think that what's going to be crucial over this 2 week period is that we all need to remember that it's not a given that this will actually work. It will work if everyone does actually collectively adhere to the guidelines and adhere to what we're being asked to do and asked not to do. I think that the government will need to communicate really clearly with people about this, and all of us as people in public life will have a role here to talk to people and to make clear that the impact that will come from this 2 week firebreak might not be, probably won't be immediately apparent right after that, and that actually that there will be a time lag before we see what the impact is. That they have done all the modelling, and as Adam was saying, that it doesn't seem like there was much of a decision there, that they had to do this, but for it to actually be effective, we will all need to adhere to what the government's asking us to do.
Yeah, just looking at a few of the questions coming in and comments. Mel Jones has said exactly what I was suggesting there. I'm afraid 2 weeks will not solve the problem. Thanks, Mel, one of my constituents here on Anglesey. How are you this evening? So I'm Mel. Again, this is something that, having seen the modelling, I'm convinced that it can make a difference. They looked actually at a 2 and a 3 week option. And they were convinced that 2 weeks could make a difference, and that was quite clear again, wasn't it, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean that the 3 week modelling, you saw even more lives saved. So that is true, and there is an argument for going longer. I suppose the government took the view that you have to balance the benefit that you get from a longer period of lockdown versus the other harms, both social and economic, mental health and all the other non-COVID related harms. So there's a bit of an assessment that you've got to make then. I think it would have been easier for the Welsh Government to have gone longer if they could have been sure that they would have had the economic support from the Treasury, because I mean that's part of the concern, obviously, in terms of businesses, their employees. The longer that you leave it, then you will see more businesses tipping it, unfortunately, into bankruptcy. So that is, that has been a key issue, obviously, in the discussion in the north of England as well, and that has been, I think, a great shame. Now that we're in this position, the second wave, that we haven't had the economic policy coming alongside the health policy, and that has, I think, led to these sort of difficult trade-off decisions that have been made.
Yeah. Right, then, back to the comments. So, right, we've got the lockdown up until the 9th of November, but what's important is really what happens after then. We can't go back to what we were doing. Comment here from... where was it? It's gone somewhere. Comments about Labour not being up to the job. Fiona Cliff, having said that, I don't believe Welsh Labour are right for the job. And let's be frank here. We have supported government when we think they're getting it right. And that's really important at a time of crisis like this. But we've got to be honest that the reason we're having to go into this period now is because strategies put in place by government have not been effective. So
I think a good example of that, Rhun, isn't it, that you were very vocal on, is the whole issue of mask wearing. Where the Welsh Government really were very, very slow to adopt. Essentially, the evidence and the consensus internationally was very much in favour of the wearing of masks, and I think there's still more that could be done on there, because we still have, I think, a voluntary policy or a decentralised policy in relation to schools, whereas I think that we should have clear national guidance, on mask wearing, and making sure that it becomes, normalised and enforced as well, which is very critical.
Because in the absence of that, but in the absence of having clear central guidance or something like that, it gives the impression to the public that actually maybe the government isn't sure, and maybe the evidence is not conclusive, when we know that that's not the case. So I've always found the government's reluctance on that to be really hard to understand. Sorry, Vin, you were saying.
Yeah, no, just looking at comments. I wanted just to be fair with Fiona Cliff, who said that I don't think Labour's up to the job. She did say, I'm incredibly supportive of the approach taken by Welsh Government over what I've seen in England. Now, that's, again, making the point that we are supportive of the cautionary principle. But this has to be the start of something fresh. This has to be the start of a new strategy, and we'll look at different elements of what needs to happen. Here's one. It came in via the app. Came from Gemma Roberts. We know that the last lockdown had a huge impact on the number of people who felt able to go to hospitals. This has caused more deaths from medical emergencies like heart attacks. Adam, we have to see a strategy being put in place that helps us keep a lid on COVID and helps the NHS get back to not normal, we can't even call it normal, but to looking after non-COVID issues, which has been a major issue and continues to be.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, this has been a consistent concern, and it's cumulative, isn't it? Because the longer we're in this situation, the longer the deeper the impact on all those other important areas of health. And one of the suggestions that we made in the debate in the Senate that we've been quite consistent on is the idea of having designated non-COVID hospitals, and it's something that other countries have done. So basically, you cohort. I think that's the phrase. Your COVID patients versus your non-COVID patients. That helps actually with some of the problems in terms of hospital infection, but also then you have designated hospitals for particular backlog of particular conditions, for cancer, for example, but it could apply also to heart conditions, so that you can actually make sure that there is a separated logistics and everything around that, and you can actually enable those operations to happen quicker, essentially, because they're in a much higher level of COVID-free kind of status is possible with a single site.
Henry on Twitter, I'm concerned about the outbreaks in Welsh hospitals, which has sadly resulted in a number of deaths. Again, this is part of what we want to see being implemented, firmly. Not just after, from now, a much firmer plan on how to limit hospital infections. Delyth.
I had a meeting earlier today, actually, with one of the health boards that covers my region, and we were talking about exactly the point that Henry's raising. I mean, it's absolutely appalling and unbearably tragic that we've seen these outbreaks happening. But the health boards, I know, are they've got plans in place now that we know that the number of infections is going up in the community, and we see that hailed and the impact that it has in terms of hospital admissions. They are now testing people when they present at hospital, regardless of whether they have symptoms. I know that now in Aneurin Bevan, for example, they're even testing people who come in for mental health appointments. So it's nothing to do with their physical health, but they are now testing everyone routinely. And I think that they're going to be implementing a policy so that unless someone has self-isolated for 14 days and has then had a negative result, they're going to be assuming that everyone should be treated as if they have COVID-19 in our hospitals, just to ensure that we don't have more outbreaks or anything like that. And I think that is the sensible thing to do, because unfortunately, people can present and can test negative when they go into hospital, but then can be incubating the virus, and then afterwards things can change. So I think that is the right precautionary approach.
FJ Faith on Facebook, I agree something needs to be done to restart surgery. I was due to have mine in April after waiting 12 months and now delayed again. You see, it's hugely worrying. In my local District General Hospital, Ysbyty Gwynedd, I think it's 1,600 people on orthopaedic waiting lists alone, and the lists are getting longer. And there are people over the past 6 months who will need surgery and haven't even been diagnosed. Gilda Dale Jackie, we need to look at the waiting times for patients. Another one, it's absurd. I was lucky to get into Morriston last November after nearly 18 months waiting, to find others in my ward waiting more than 3 years. This could get another hair running. We won't go down down that particular route, but this is the lack of resilience that has already been building up in Welsh hospitals. We know it causes a problem every winter. No, we didn't expect a pandemic, but that's why you have to have a resilient and a sustainable health service that can flex and can deal with things. I mean, this has shown, thank goodness for the staff we've got in our health and care services, but we shouldn't have to rely, Adam, on just their dedication and just their willingness to go the extra 100 miles every time, should we?
Yeah, in the private sector, sort of management consultants talk about the importance of slack in a company, and actually counterintuitively, because when we hear so much about efficiency, but slack is a very important thing, because you need that to flex when any organization faces, an unexpected challenge. Then you need that ability to be able to have the resources to be able to respond, and that's something that you're right, Rhun, that the NHS clearly hasn't had for some time, and it's put an enormous strain on particularly the front line of the NHS workforce in particular.
Down to the really important stuff. Delyth asked me, she wanted to put on a good impression. Am I allowed to drink tea on this webcast? David Wynne Griffiths asks, what's in the mug, Delyth? So is it tea?
It is tea.
It is tea. There you go. There's
Thank God that I still had liquid left to be able to show you then.
not G and T, yes, certainly.
Yeah. Where are we? A question here. Communication, that's another thing, Adam, that we want to be reset. I'm concerned that whilst some messages have got through to people, washing hands, I think people get the importance of washing hands now. I think there needs to be a new drive on communication with people. And Gillian, right here, I agree with the Firebreak, but the info from Welsh Government has been chaotic. I work in a large supermarket. We had 4 hours notice to stop trading non-essentials. Colleagues had just finished working the aisles just to have to take it off again. getting the messaging clear is important, not just in terms of being able to prove the competence of government. And this, the uncertainty that's been around this just raises questions about, does government know what it's doing? And that's not useful at a time like this. But that communication really has to be, there has to be a new retuning of the way Welsh government communicates its messages. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think that, the 3 C's of communication, clarity, consistency, and credibility, and I think that at different times, the UK government, certainly the Welsh government as well, I think there have been weaknesses, haven't there? And that ultimately, our most important tool in defeating this virus is public trust in government, and public support for the broad thrust of the public health policy. And we've been fortunate in Wales, I think, that the public largely have been very much united and working together and being an important part of defeating the virus. But it doesn't help when you get mixed messages and inconsistency and lack of clarity, and people having to search around on arcane websites trying to find answers to some pretty important questions. So I think that and you contrast it with some governments. I mean, the standout success of New Zealand, which we're very familiar with. Interestingly, and this is sort of people might be surprised to hear me saying this, but I don't agree with the strategy that Sweden has adopted in many areas. But I think one thing that people do say, well, they have actually communicated that strategy pretty clearly, to the extent that we know what the strategy of Sweden is, and there's a debate in Sweden, but by and large, people know where their government has been, and they've been consistent about it, and they've communicated it. So, pick a strategy, communicate it well. That is absolutely critical, to any nation.
Yeah, including convincing people why it's so important to have things like fire breaks. You wanted to come in, Delith?
Well, in response to what Gillian was saying there, and what you and Adam have both been saying, this lack of clarity that's been coming out from the government, that's made me really quite angry today, actually, because I've had a number of constituents contacting me who are affected by this point that Gillian's raising in terms of this lack of clarity about what exactly essential was, what was going to be classed as essential, what was not going to be classed as essential, and how late in the day that advice actually was published. And I think, unfortunately, it has been a running theme with the Welsh government recently, when Caerphilly in my region was the first place in Wales to be asked to go into a localized restrictions. And the announcement was made, and it was over 24 hours before the guidance was published, making clear what exactly that was going to mean for people. Okay, and it was very close to when the restrictions actually came into play that guidance was made clear. And I can't have been alone in terms of representatives for that area in getting hundreds upon hundreds of queries from really worried people with valid questions, asking, well, does this mean that I can still, go across the border to care for someone who I would usually get? And because that guidance hadn't been published, it caused unnecessary strain and angst for people. I don't understand why that lesson hasn't been learned yet by the government. They will have been planning for these eventualities for a long time. If they could just tell the public what's going to be expected of them and businesses at the time of making the announcement, I think that would really do away with a lot of, like I say, unnecessary confusion.
Yeah, for business as well, one of the issues I had at the start of the summer, when it was clear that restrictions were going to be lifted, hospitality businesses on Anglesey weren't saying lift the restrictions now. let us resume our work now. They weren't saying that. What they were saying was, can you please give us an idea when, if things go according to plan, when we'll be allowed to do what? Give us advance warning so we can prepare for it. It's communication at that level, isn't it? We literally are all in this, together, and that means everybody needing to be respected for the information that they need. That information being offered by government. We've got lots of questions coming in and comments actually on this business of essential goods. The question asked by somebody, where was it? It was basically asking, what do we think of?
Well, is that Yola Hughes?
Where is it? Yola? You find it? Can you find it? Is there
Yola Hughes has.
Right?
It's up on the screen.
That's the basic question. I'm happy to answer that. I think I know what government is trying to do here, and I think it is genuinely trying to protect non-supermarkets, rather than them being able to mop up trade. So I get that. I think there's also a message that this is a proper lockdown. We're not meant to leave home unless it's to go and pick up essential things, and to go to work if we have to go to work. So going shopping, going out for a day's shopping shouldn't be allowed during a period of lockdown. But again, it's perhaps something that could have been resolved by a little bit more advanced planning.
Exactly, and I think that just the chaotic nature in which it was announced has again meant that people have been confused and quite understandably angry about it. And again, I'm not sure that they actually had thought this completely through. I agree with you, Rhun. I can see what the motivation for it probably is, and I think that is the right motivation. But they may not have thought through the consequences of this, which were obviously going to be unintended. But there will be people who are not able to buy baby clothes or something like that online and would normally go to the supermarket for that. And now people like that are going to be confused. I think so much of this could have been avoided if they had just said from the start, right, this is exactly what is going to be expected of people. This is what it's going to mean. This is why we're doing it. Because when you introduce an intervention, well, you can't introduce an intervention, but when you bring in something like a Firebreak, you are asking an awful lot of people, and you need to have a contract of trust. And in order for it to work, it has to be both ways, I think.
Contract of trust, there are things that we need to do. Wash our hands, distance ourselves, keep to the guidance. But there are things, Adam, from the 9th of November, we need to see government doing. We've discussed a few of them, but top of the list surely has to be having a properly robust testing system. It's at the heart of the battle against the virus, and government hasn't been getting it right.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, let's cast our minds back to March. What was the message from the WHO? Test, trace, isolate, support. Absolutely central to all those success stories. And there are many countries, of course. We've got to remind ourselves in Southeast Asia, for example, New Zealand, even in Europe, Finland, Norway, Denmark, about 1/10 of the death rate from COVID compared to Wales. So there are countries that we can learn from. But I mean, one of the key consistent things is a strong, robust, resilient test and trace system. The good news is, Rhun, actually on contact tracing, so on that element, then actually Wales is doing pretty well. Yep. We've got a very, very successful local outbreak prevention teams working very quickly. Improving all the time, but getting up to above 90% contact tracing within 24 hours. Remember, the WHO target is about 80% for best in class. So Wales is actually, talk about world leading on contact tracing element. Yep. We're up there. The problem is the test system is letting us down, and it's not the Welsh labs, by the way. I mean, I had a meeting with Hywel Dda yesterday. The Welsh labs in Hywel Dda, we were told, so that's the NHS and the university labs. They were returning tests results to the contact tracing system within 24 hours, 97%. The UK Lighthouse labs, so the swabs at home, etc., it was 3%. Yeah, so complete failure on the part of the UK system, and great success on the behalf of the Welsh labs. So what we got to do is clear. We got to build up the Welsh labs, and that together with a very successful Welsh contact tracing system, I think could potentially, Rhun, put us in a very, very strong position.
Yeah, I've said many times that I think Welsh government started off on on testing when it announced back in, I think it was the 23rd of March, that it was hoping to get 9,000 tests by the end of April, which was a pretty good target. But of course, Wales was scuppered because we had those thousands of tests taken away by us, effectively, by UK government. But Welsh government then made a big strategic mistake, which was to put to over-depend on these lighthouse labs over which they had no control. And in being attracted to these lighthouse labs, which were paid for by UK government, moving capacity away from Welsh testing to a lighthouse, can't remember when that would have been, during the summer at some point, that meant that when lighthouse almost inevitably ran into trouble, we were going to be facing problems here in Wales, and quotas on how many tests we were able to have in Wales, controls, people being told to travel 100 miles for a test in the wrong place, failing to get tests locally. To my mind, what should have happened and what should still happen is that you have your own sort of Welsh testing regime in place, capacity grown, and actually not theoretical capacity, but if you say, you've got capacity for 15,000 and you're only doing 3,000, well, I don't believe it. If you say there's 15,000, let's have 15,000 that we can use, and then top that up with what we could get from the lighthouse labs. I mean, to me, that would be the best approach, because control over our own methods of dealing with the virus have been proven to be important. We are in a better position than England has been. I wish England well with their strategies, but ours have been better. But on testing, we found ourselves tied to the problems that they've got in our neighbouring country.
Yeah, and if you combine the fact that the Welsh lab network, which is now, finally, because we called for this, didn't we, right at the start, but they are building up the capacity of the Welsh lab network. And if you combine that, link that, Rhun, as well with the advances that are being made in rapid testing, so we have things like the LAMP test system, so the things that the WHO now have accredited, these rapid testing methods, then that's a very, very exciting prospect, because if we have a fully functioning Welsh test and trace system plus rapid testing, then we can actually aim for that sort of zero COVID type approach, where you aggressively suppress the virus, where you identify clusters, you get in there, you do backward contact tracing to work out where somebody's got the infection from. You do forward contact tracing very quickly to prevent further infection. And then you are able to suppress the level of the cases right down. And then that means, of course, in those countries that have done that, isn't it, Rhun? They are allowed, they're able then, of course, to do all the other things in terms of life, in terms of the economy, because they've got a hold on things, they've got a grip on things. Yeah. And that's what we got to get back to.
Let's bring a comment from Mel Jones back onto the screen. This pandemic has shown clearly how important it is that here in Wales we seriously need to be in full control of our own rules and regulations. We need to have a serious debate about our destiny. Now, I mean, that's taking us down a different path. He's talking about the whole future of Wales, but it has made us think. Here we are saying we could have done this better with testing. Were we, had the right decisions being made on keeping control?
I think it is very relevant.
It is.
It's very relevant to what we're talking about, though, isn't it? Because, I mean, this is why I think we were also frustrated with the Welsh Government's decision to rely or to strategically go for linking themselves with the lighthouse labs. They didn't need to do that. That was a decision that the Welsh Government made. I think that we've had this dual conversation that's been happening over the past few months, or this dual vision by people, where people are at one and the same time gaining a greater appreciation of devolution, of Wales's ability to make decisions that are most beneficial to the public in Wales and to public health. But at the same time, and when the Welsh Government has gone down that route, as we've all made clear that we've been very supportive of that. But when the Welsh Government has sometimes decided to follow what the UK government is doing because they think that this four-nation approach is intrinsically better, that's where things have fallen down. So I think that Mel's point is actually really relevant to all of this, because this isn't some kind of constitutional question or like a nice to have. Our ability to make decisions for the benefit and to the benefit of the people of Wales, it's actually, in a time of pandemic, really essential to the reality of people's lives.
Yeah, and that's why we've seen new members coming on board with Plaid Cymru's and my constituency and your constituencies and regions all over Wales. Why so many people are joining Yes Cymru as a campaign, because this has triggered something. As an aside here, we'll get back to a sort of post-November the 9th in a second, but the previous questions on could an independent Wales afford to survive? Would my family be economically safe? Now people are asking, you know what? If Wales was able to run its own affairs, would my family be safer? Would they be healthier? Would they be looked after better? Those are very powerful emotions, and they're very, very important questions to ask at a time like this, Adam.
Yeah, and I think even the First Minister himself, in an interview recently, acknowledged the 7% increase in support for independence that has been since the beginning of the pandemic, and that was building on, of course, a rising pattern of support anyway. So, I think it has been definitely a moment of national reflection, and I think people are inspired by the things that we've referred to already that Wales has got right in this pandemic, in a sense of, well, look, as a nation, we have the capacity in many ways to work far more effectively than the rather lumbering British state. And that's been repeated right throughout the world, isn't it? Many of the success stories have been, smaller countries that are able to respond to challenges much more quickly than the sort of fairly hidebound dysfunctional bureaucracy that you've got at Westminster.
Call me Mr. Lane on Twitter. I'm not telling you to call me Mr. Lane. This is somebody called.
Why would
I want to be called Mr. Lane? But this is Call Me Mr. Lane. Concerned about reliance on UK vaccination strategy, considering performance thus far. Contingencies, he or she asks. I mean, it's not the first time I've been asked that question. When we've seen what happened with Lighthouse, when we've seen what happened with Roche, can we confidently look forward to, depending on the UK to roll out COVID vaccination? It's a worry, Adam.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think I think cooperation on vaccines even at a global level is really, really important, and I think that is essential so that we don't have competition, and unnecessarily and unhelpfully at a global level. So we need to be pooling our knowledge, our expertise, and our resources. But I think you're absolutely right within the UK context. Based on our experience, the delivery of the vaccine, for example, planning for that, because manufacture is the science is one thing, the manufacture is another element, but the third element is the actual logistics of the delivery of the vaccine itself. And on that element, certainly, based on our experience, that is better planned and implemented locally. And it's the Welsh Government with local authorities that should be planning for that, absolutely.
And it's the equity, isn't it, really, right? These are the things that have been, worrying. The way different parts of the UK are treated. I've been appalled by the lack of respect shown to the Welsh First Minister by UK government in not responding to very, very important questions on funding or whatever. Cooperation is so important between our nations. But when you had the UK Department of Health telling PPE suppliers in England not to sell to Wales at a time when we were meant to be working together, and actually when there was a deal on sharing PPE, which again was important, Wales shared out 10 million pieces of PPE to the rest of the UK and got 1 million back. And yes, I have got that the right way around, considering our size and the rest of the UK. So cooperation is great, but it's got to be a two-way thing. And that's the fear that, that we have to be, when cooperation happens on the vaccine, there is real equity of treatment for all parts of these islands.
Absolutely. I mean, and was it, how many months was it that the First Minister went without being able to speak to Boris Johnson on the telephone? I know it was from the end of May until either a time in August, or it might have been the end of August, but I mean, there were a period of months. I mean, the lack of respect that it shows is just, I think it's worrying.
But there comes a point, surely, if you're First Minister of a country that's being ignored for that long, you march on Downing Street.
I mean, and this is the
go and knock on the door. He's not getting my letters, Did I?
No. I mean, yeah, and
on it. Let's go and knock on the door.
I mean, I think that this is the frustration that we've all felt, is that from that lack of respect, why was he surprised, and why did he keep on writing these letters? Why did you keep on waiting or expecting that you'll get a different result? Mae Glenys Williams wedi rhoi, cwestiwn lan on sylw. So Glenys Williams has put a comment up. Mae'n dweud, hen bryd I Gymru fod yn annibynnol. Mae sefyllfa yma wedi profi nad ydy Llywodraeth Westminster yn meddwl dim byd ohonon ni yma yng Nghymru. So I mean, Glenys Williams has said that, it's high time for us to be independent. This situation has shown that the Westminster government doesn't actually care about us in Wales. I mean, certainly the lack of respect that we've been talking about, and that lack of equity that Boris Johnson and his government, I don't know, that they wouldn't even bring forward their plans to help businesses in order to lock in with this firebreak. It just seems deliberate, and we keep on seeing the same pattern. Why on earth does it take so long for the Welsh government to actually see that? Sorry, Adam.
Yeah, and with the latest U-turn from Rishi Sunak, isn't it? Finding some money down the back of the Treasury sofa again. And yet he tells us that additional money is not going to be available to, in Wales or Scotland. There's going to be no Barnet consequential, even though that's an open-ended commitment in terms of those businesses that need that additional support in England. So I think there was a piece in one of the London papers referring to a near-colonial attitude on part of Westminster. I got into hot water a few times by using that term, but they're using it themselves now to describe what's the reality that I think has been absolutely laid bare throughout this pandemic. Really, that I mean, we're not on the radar, the Celtic nations, and we are Scotland. They fear Scotland, but there is indifference bordering on contempt towards Wales. Yeah. And you see that time after time.
Gillian writes, I'd never thought about independence before this pandemic, but I have to agree, it's the way to go. Lots of people coming to a similar conclusion to Gillian. Lots of things, defining different values as well, between certainly the government we have on a UK level now and sort of our wishes held across political parties, it must be said, in Wales. Jeremy Brookman here, with Wales guaranteeing free school meals during the lockdown, which is something we're very pleased that the Welsh government is doing. Do you think that a Plaid Cymru government could look at a government food card scheme similar to the USA food stamps that could help provide food for people on low income, so no person in Wales has to go hungry? Before you answer that, Adam, a lot of people in my constituency have been quite distressed by that vote by MPs in Westminster this week. It was England only, so not relevant to Wales really, but still a very important point of principle. With MPs voting against giving free school meals during school holidays at this time, the Marcus Rashford campaign that really has gained traction because people can see that it's fair. And here in my constituency, you have chip shops and businesses giving out food because they know that in addition to the food that is being given out instead of school meals here, we have to look after our children and people living in poverty. So, sorry, Adam, specifically on that USA proposal.
Yeah, well, I somebody that I was on free school meals for a while at school, so yes, I mean, I think it's appalling the attitude. One of the quotes, wasn't it, the Tory MP saying that they refuse to nationalise our children. Well, how about taking responsibility for poverty? And because that's what it's all about. I mean, we wouldn't be having to have these kind of policies if we didn't have the deep inequality that is there. So, I'm proud of the stance that Wales has taken, and we need to go further. So that's why ideas like the proposals that we put on the table, the Welsh child payment, £35 a week for every child in a family in poverty in Wales, and that including those many families were in work poverty. That could be transformative. That could take tens of thousands of children currently, living in poverty above the poverty threshold overnight, and that would be only the start, of course, towards ending child poverty in total. And in terms of food. Poverty is such an important element of the whole poverty picture. So I think you're right. I mean, in America, they talk about food deserts, where places where you can't get, high quality, affordable, nutritious food, and that is the lived experience of many people in Wales as well. So yeah, we should be looking at not just looking at possibly taxing junk food, because that's has a huge problem in terms of people's obesity. But maybe we should be looking at making healthy food cheaper. Yep. So you're actually, you're actually starting to change the balance, because we know that one of the reasons that junk food they've been pushed and promoted by some of the large food businesses, internationally in North America and the rest of it. This goes back many decades. We need to actually tip that balance and have a local food system which is based on local food production, high quality, nutritious food, and make sure that it's affordable. It's within the grasp of everyone, not just those on higher incomes.
Yeah. I want to turn to business. We've talked about the need to change a number of fundamental things relating to the pandemic in terms of health and the fight against COVID. One of the things that there still has to be a lot of fine-tuning on, some major changes in some ways as well, is on the support to those sectors and businesses that are suffering, and some of them are still not able to get the support they need. A question here from Sean Sullivan, which I think we'll spend a few minutes reflecting on. I've just locked the door of my business for 2 weeks. I have plenty of work and customers wanting my services. In theory, I've been closed for business for 2 months due to local lockdowns, closed for business from March. This is crippling small business. We're making all the sacrifices. We don't even know what's going to happen at the end of the 2 weeks. Again, that business needs clarity on what is happening, and that business needs to know that it's getting the support it needs. Delith. Exactly.
Or Sean, actually. Hi, Sean. So Sean lives in my region. I think that this again comes down to some of what we've already been talking about, the contract of trust that the government is needing to actually be upholding its side of then. And they're not at the moment, because if people like Sean and other constituents who've been in touch with me today don't know exactly they don't even know, they can't begin to know what's going to happen at the end of this 2 week period. People have to have confidence. People have to feel not only that they can understand why this firebreak is happening, but that actually things are going to improve afterwards, not just in terms of the trajectory of the virus, but that there's going to be support that is going to be there. I mean, this is having an economic impact. It's also having an impact on people's mental health. I mean, imagine the strain of running your own business and not knowing what is going to happen at the end of this 2 week period. I mean, I think that that's quite unconscionable. I think that the government has an obligation here to tell people what is going. I mean, obviously, we can't know exactly what restrictions are going to be in place after this 2-week period. But for goodness sake, they should be communicating more with businesses so that people can actually understand what the situation is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Sean's point really underlines the fact that, you know, lockdowns are a sign of failure. They become necessary when things are out of control, and you've got exponential rise in cases, and that unfortunately is where we've ended up again. Yeah, and the lockdown was necessary back in March because, you know, we hadn't prepared, you know, effectively, and we know that now. Even the former head of the UK Civil Services kind of admitted it. But we shouldn't be in this point. And if you look at those countries that have actually, you know, done better economically, they've got higher GDP, they've got higher business activity. They are the ones that are low or zero COVID. So in Europe, you know, you're looking at the Finland and the Norways, yeah, because you know, if you manage to lower the level of infections, then actually you can allow something more akin to mainstream economic and business activity to return. And unfortunately, that, you know, we are, like many other European countries, going round in this cycle of lockdowns, local lockdowns, now a circuit breaker, which, you know, sadly, you know, became inevitable. But we've got to break this cycle, because it is, you know, it is causing all of the harms that you just referred to, Delith, in terms of people's mental well-being. But it is, you know, I've had heartbreaking conversations with family businesses that have taken 40, 50 years to build up, and, you know, are teetering on the brink, you know, and, you know, and these people, they stand to lose everything. And that is the absolute foundation of our economy. And, you know, that's absolutely why we've got to have a new strategy, Rhun, because, you know, even the talk already of the possibility of another circuit breaker, I think it undermines this one in a sense. You know, we've got to get people behind the next 2 weeks. We've all got a part to play in the next 2 weeks. You know, we need this to be as effective as possible, so we don't get in this position again. And that has to be at the heart of the message and the heart of the strategy as well.
Yeah, Gilderdale Jackie, NHS staff locally, said only Tuesday that we need to prepare for another lockdown after Boxing Day. You know, and I'm hearing the same talk here on Anglesey, and we've got to be clear on the need for a strategy that tries to avoid that. I've no question that there will be a need for local restrictions at times. We've called, haven't we, for a number of months now to operate ideally in a hyper-local way. We don't want national lockdowns like the one we're going into now, but we think we have to because of the way things have slipped. But, you know, we will have local lockdowns. How important is it, do you think, that not only does the business support have to be sorted out, does the health aspect, stopping COVID, have to be sorted out, but the kind of measures that we have in place, a sustainable set of restrictions, if you like, or sort of a new way of living. How important is it to get that right after November, Adam? Because, for example, I think we could live in the way we were living in August for some time. You know, restrictions, yes, but lots of freedoms too, and business being able to operate. Well, how do you think you get that balance right moving forward?
Yeah, I think that it is critically important that we do get from November the 9th a clear sense of the plan and taking us right through to the summer, and, you know, hopefully the potential of a vaccine. But and I think that needs to be based around a simpler, smaller, possibly set of measures which are clearly communicated and consistently enforced. So you know, I think that is the confusion that you can see in England with the different tiering, and even the same tiers having the different rules, etc. You know, that's the opposite of what you need and what you want. What you want is getting the basics right. So as you said, you know, distance, mask wearing, washing hands, etc. Getting back to those. I remember earlier on in the pandemic, walking along pavements, and people were very, very careful, sort of crossing the road and etc. Keeping space within supermarkets very, very clearly. And, that needs to be underlined again. There are some basic things that actually are the most effective of all. So I think that we need a simpler set of measures which are evidence-based, which are clearly communicated, and then a test and trace system which allows us to respond very, very quickly to localized outbreaks. And you're right, Rhun, in a localized outbreak, one of the tools in the toolbox is the idea of a very localized, temporary, smart lockdown. So hyper-local lockdown, not county-wide, but very much focused around that cluster. That's where we need to get back to, I think, in November the 9th. And that's a far better plan than an idea of, well, we'll just let it rise back up again and then have another circuit breaker and do this, over the course of the next 9 months, because people are going to get, they're exhausted already. But I think that, fatigue then is going to be a massive factor. Yeah. And then even the circuit breaker will cease to work.
Yeah, Nigel Thomas Hunt, asking here, what is the route out if the circuit breaker doesn't work? And it's a good question. It's a question that lots of us are asking, but it would be really handy if, first of all, government could please publish quickly as it can now what the plan is to try to avoid that from happening, and then we'll be able to sort of scrutinise, as we do, committees and cross-party, and as a party in opposition, what those plans are. Maybe try to push for a change of direction on certain elements, but we need that plan to give us confidence, Delyth.
Well, absolutely, because there are some things, to do with national security where you can understand that a government would keep its cards close to its chest. In this, because of all the things we've been talking about and how important it is that public trust is part of that contract with them, there is, the risks of not being upfront and not being totally open about plans. It just means that people will not buy into the restrictions. It risks undoing the sacrifices that we are all making. So, the government, for its own sake and for all of our sakes, they have to be open about these things. And I know that we'll continue to push for that transparency.
Yeah. Couple of minutes to go. Coming up to 7 o'clock. Or these hours go quickly. Stuart Snedden. No doubt Wales needs independence. Westminster do not care for Wales. Lots of comments like that coming in this evening. But I'm going to finish on this one, if I can. This has come in. Mel, you're hogging the show. Mel's name's been on the screen about 3 times. Yeah, there's some good questions and good points coming in from Mel, and this one is particularly pertinent. We are a political party, after all, who want to govern Wales and want to be given an opportunity to govern Wales better. How's this? This comment is mainly directed at Adam, as you are the leader of Plaid. Please emphasise how important the May election is. Plaid has to win a majority in the Senedd. Every effort should be directed at that goal. I feel so strongly how important next May will be for Wales and for Plaid to be able to govern. Adam.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mel, for focusing all of our minds on that, because, you're absolutely right. All of the things that we talked about tonight, the need for, an agile government, the need for us to build up our foundational economy, the need for us to get to grips with that poverty that has, scarred Wales for generations. That work can only be delivered if we get a change in government. We've had one party in power for 20 years, and I think it's fair to say that they've run out of ideas. They've run out of a sense of urgency, and that's the large part of why we are still talking about the same problems that we were a decade or 2 decades ago, is because of that. And so I think there's a lot of optimism in Wales at the moment. There's a new spirit there, and it's reflected in the rise of support for independence, and even in the difficulties and the challenges that we've all faced in the last 6 months. I think there's a growing sense of national self-confidence. But what we need now to build on that, of course, is a change in government in May, as happened in Scotland in 2007. Look at the pride that the people of Scotland can take in their First Minister and a Scottish government that even in the midst of the global pandemic is showing leadership. That's what we could have with Wales. And, in the short term, it'll mean that we'd be able to, change all those economic and social policies we need progress on. In the long term, of course, it puts Wales on a different path altogether, because the first step into getting to independence is electing a pro-independence government that can put independence on the agenda like it's never been before.
Adam, diolch yn fawr iawn. Delys, diolch yn fawr iawn. Mae dy baned di'n oer erbyn hyn. Dos i nôl.
Fi di hen orffen y paned, yn iawn.
Oh yeah, Delys can go grab a fresh cup of tea. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd sydd wedi gwylio a cymryd rhan, a di gyrru cwestiynau mewn. Thanks to for all the questions and comments and ideas as well, because we as mere politicians depend on your ideas, your innovations that we can hopefully have a chance to deliver in government from May next year. Have a good weekend. Next fortnight's going to be tough, but we'll need to pull together to get through this. So help yourselves, those around you, your community, as Wales has done so well throughout this pandemic. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you.